Welcome to The Informed Investor, where we break down the latest financial headlines, bringing in research and insights to help you separate the news from the noise.
Welcome to The Informed Investor. We are coming from our Charlotte, North Carolina office here today, and we're diving into the must-dos and the must-not-dos when it comes to your financial lives. So part one, we looked at those decisions you want to make going up to 50 years old. And today we're going to do part two, which is going to be the decisions post 50 and into retirement. So joining me here today are two advisors that are in for our educational event. And pleasure to introduce you guys again here, just in case somebody didn't see part one. But Mike Mers, Aspen Capital Management from Boise, Idaho. Tim Slattery from Heritage Investment Group in Tampa, Florida. So guys, I really enjoyed the part one. A lot of fun here. Excited to dive into part two, 50 plus, because that's certainly, unfortunately, where I'm at.
Here we are.
In my family. Yeah. I think we're all here.
At least two of the three of us are.
All right. So key takeaways from part one is just make sure your money's working for you. Let compounding work. Find your tax deferred vehicles. Be thoughtful about your spending. Let's get into it here when, let's say, 50 and up. So now we talked about families in the earlier stage. Now the families are probably older. The kids are a little bit older. High school, maybe they're getting into college or maybe even getting out of the house. What are some of the things we want to be thinking about that we got to get right in sort of that 50 to 65 group? And I'll probably say too that you think about a career standpoint, it's probably when you're starting to really get your maximum earnings years
Peak
and things like
years,
that. Yeah. So Mike, why don't you just take us there, start us off?
Yeah, well, I'll start with probably you're right. Usually this is going to be somebody's hitting their peak earning years, right? And I would say from a financial planning standpoint, probably the biggest mistake we see people make in this time window is lifestyle creep. Right? As their income goes up, that lifestyle just keeps creeping up and up and up over time. And as you mentioned, they're also now starting to get, within line of sight to retirement, right? And retirement is maybe out there. It might be 10, 15 years down the road. But the biggest challenge we see people having is that lifestyle creep. And once they get used to that lifestyle, it's really hard to back it down when they move into retirement. And a really expensive lifestyle is really difficult to maintain in retirement without a really large nest egg. So for me, the biggest thing I would say from a financial planning standpoint in this phase, be really careful about lifestyle creep.
Do you have some specific examples like that you've observed from people? And there's probably a lot of FOMO, like, well, my friend's doing this, so I want to do some of this.
A ton of FOMO. I think in episode one, Tim mentioned, a lot of the fun things that we like to do in life, right? So second homes and boats and airplanes and travel and entertainment, right? And just that creep for a lot of people that aren't disciplined, right? As their income grows over time, they allow their lifestyle to consume that growth, right? And so the big things I would focus on is probably the spending on the kids, which can creep pretty substantially. And then just like fixed cost spending as people are buying second homes and, multiple cars and a lot of travel and entertainment that becomes baked into a lifestyle that becomes really hard to reverse.
Tim, anything you'd add to that on observations on creep?
Yeah. I think I couldn't agree more with Mike. I think we do see that in that stage of life. The one thing I encourage my clients to do, if you're in that stage where you do have more disposable income, and if your lifestyle is going to creep higher, I think what I tell people is that it's better to do things than to have things. If you're going to spend some extra money, spend it on your children, spend it on doing enjoyable things with your children, spend it on travel. It doesn't have to be long, extended, fancy trips. Short vacations are fine, but spending money on adventures and on activities is going to bring you more happiness than spending money on shiny objects, especially if they're depreciating assets.
And I think there's quite a bit of research around that.
There is.
That supports that as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right? The experiences drive joy, not what's sitting in your garage.
And I think with our age group in particular, I've noticed that with the generation behind us, the millennials, I think actually, I'll have to compliment them about this. I think the millennials have a much better handle on this idea of doing things rather than having things, and spending, being wise about spending time as a limited resource, and just the knowledge that this shiny new object isn't going to make you happy, but spending time with the people you love absolutely will.
And then as you get into that, I'll say the latter part of that stage, you start thinking about things like your estate plan, wills, who's the trustee of the will, stuff like that. Incredibly, incredibly important. So give us some thoughts on the must-dos with that.
Well, I think that's where, as you get to the latter part of this, sort of 50 to retirement window is where you really have to start to have, at that point, you really need a financial plan. Right. And that financial plan is certainly going to include things like estate planning, making sure you've got all your healthcare directives and wills, trust, whatever's appropriate for that person's, situation set up. One of the things I would say as someone approaches retirement is really understanding your spending and what it costs you to live your lifestyle becomes really important. For us, as people transition into retirement, we see the most successful first 2 to 3 years of retirement from those who really understood what their spending was going into retirement. Because they can make that extension into retirement with a lot of confidence. But if they don't know before they retire what they're really spending, that can be a really emotional experience for them. So I'd say get your estate planning, get a good financial planner that can really develop a financial and a retirement plan for you, and start documenting what your spending is. You don't need to know how much you spend on coffee or pizza every week, but you need to understand the big buckets.
Yeah.
And I would say this when we ask our clients that, just in the initial stages of this planning conversation, just very casually tell me, how much do you think you spend? And everyone underestimates what they spend. Everyone. When they actually do the exercise, and we'll go through a 6-month period or a year period and say, okay, let's look back. How much did you actually spend? And I think it's shocking to a lot of people. I think we all spend more than we think that we do. And by the way, one-time things count. Yeah, I replaced my roof. It was $46,000, but that's just a one-time thing.
Yeah.
Well, no, that counts. And the new car counts. And all of these things count. So we have to take that into account. You can't just cast it aside.
I bet it's a combination. In some cases, they just really don't know. And in some cases, they're just probably, I don't want to say embarrassed, but spending too much. They kind of inherently know they're spending too much.
Yes.
Just probably don't want to come
Yeah,
clean
you don't
on
want
it.
to ask that question with only one of the spouses in the room.
That's a really
Right?
good point.
You want to ask that question with both of them, because we all know in our lives, usually, one person's responsible for purchasing and buying certain things, and the other's responsible for other things, and oftentimes one doesn't know what the other is spending on things. So yeah, we've run into a lot of problems before when we get an answer from one, and then the other person finds out what the answer was and goes, "You've got to be kidding me! We spend way more than that."
Marry a saver.
Yeah. Going back to our prior conversation on marry a saver. I think that's great advice there. Going back to like wills and trusts and things like that, it's incredibly important in this phase. It's really important also for the prior stage, right? When you have kids, you want to make sure you have a will in place, and who's going to watch the kids in case something does happen to the couple, those kind of things. But I'm going to bring this back now, because it's not just you want to have one for you and your family, but starting to think about your parents then. And Tim, we were talking about this a little bit too, where it can get very complicated, even on very, I'll say, not basic situations. So like my dad died, he passed away about 3 years ago. And so I stepped in and did a lot of stuff with my mom, and I was shocked. I'll say what a pain it was to deal with this stuff and how complex it gets on a very simple situation. And so where I'm going with this is looking up to your parents' level of their trust, their wills, who's the directive on some of these things. So maybe, Tim, you want to run with that a little bit?
Yeah,
here?
so we, between me and my wife, we're 4 for 4 on parents with dementia or Alzheimer's. So as you're in the stage of life that we're in, you do need to start thinking about what's the plan with respect to our aging parents. And yes, a lot of it is with wills and trusts, and not only that, but you have to have a living will set up, right? And what about your advanced directives and healthcare surrogates and that sort of things? When we talk about estate planning, maybe the clients aren't thinking about those healthcare related legal situations that we need to account for. So yes, you absolutely, if your parents haven't taken care of this, it is in your best interest, if you're in this 50-ish age group, to help your parents get that in place, because you do not want to be doing that in a crisis situation. And before you get to a crisis, you should also have a conversation with aging parents about if you do need, whether it be assisted living or if you do need to be in a memory care facility, at what point, what are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? Do your two parents want to be together? Can they be together if one of them is declining faster than the other? And it's extremely important to have these conversations beforehand, because I've seen it personally on more than one occasion, and with frequently with clients, where doing this in a crisis situation is as bad as it gets. It is it's a situation you do not want to put yourself in. It's incredibly stressful. It can be incredibly expensive, and it's just much more easily done beforehand in a calm, rational way that everyone can express their interests, and you get input from all the family members and do it right.
Do you have a couple of things here? I'm going to give some examples in my mind here. But
I was going to say, I think Tim covered the healthcare side well. You talked about dealing with the parents to the extent that your parents will listen, right? I think one of the great things we can help them do is consolidate and simplify. Right? So many people, our parents' generation, have 2, 3, 4 bank accounts, at different banks. They want to have they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket. And as a result, they've let their life get really complex financially. And at some point, somebody's got to deal with that. Right. And so to the extent that we can get them to simplify things a lot, reduce accounts, narrow things down, it makes it a whole lot easier for the heirs when they pass.
Well, I'll give a couple examples I went through that had no understanding of how this stuff works. And so I'd encourage anybody to go out there and you can probably go find a whole bunch of different things that guide you through what's going to come. But for example, when my dad passed away, so I called the credit card company, said, hey, can you take his name off? They're like, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for calling. Instantly, they shut the card off. Well, I didn't know they were going to do that. Right? I go, well, what about my mom? They're like, well, she's going to have to apply for another credit card, her own credit card. So things like that, like, well, okay, what about the bank account? Instantly, it had to be changed to something else. My dad's retirement account, his IRA, that got frozen for a while as they had to go then launch her in her name. Yeah. And so everything's just sort of suspended. So I mentioned those things just to say, make sure you got some liquidity somewhere to get you through those things. Yes. Another one that was just, you don't think about these things. My mom was doing something at the bank, so she had to show her ID. Well, it expired like 2 weeks before. And so like we need another form of identification. We couldn't find their passports anywhere. It's not that they were out traveling, but it's a form of identification. Yeah. So we can't find their passports. So my sister, to get a new ID, went to DMV. Like, well, we need her marriage certificate. Like, well, I don't know where that is. We couldn't find that. So literally 60 years ago, they had to go to the state they got married in and get it from 60 years ago to go get a license to be able to vote and do some banking. I mean, just things like that.
And those things snowball quickly, right? Just something as simple as, where's their password list? And if this happened, with my parents, as they started to decline in their mental acuity, you're having to log into all their accounts online, and where are the passwords? And of course, you're going into Dad's desk, and they're all written on Post-it notes, which probably something we want to encourage them not to do.
Yeah, really
as well,
secure.
Right?
And they're all the same.
They're all the same in capital letters with exclamation points. And so security was not at top of mind. So yes, that's a conversation you need to have as well, because now in the digital age, we have all these passwords all over the place that have been replaced and updated, and some of them haven't. And let's try and consolidate those in a single safe place, to where when we do have to step in as speaking for our parents or representing our parents, that we're prepared to do that.
And there's some really good places to do that, where it's all encrypted and everything else, these passwords, and people have access to it. People being the family member, the trustee,
right.
around that. All right, one other thing I want to mention. You guys have mentioned a second home kind of in this age group too, about just be careful, make sure it fits in your plan on a second home. You mentioned even in the last phase of you kind of want to rent, maybe not own a second home. And I bring this up, the irony of it, because both of you have a second home. Yeah, you're telling people not to have a second home.
This is true. Yes, guilty.
Explain that.
Guilty.
Well, my explanation is I bought mine before Airbnb became a thing. So that's my excuse. No, honestly, I think Tim and I would both agree our second homes have given both of our families great memories. So I wouldn't say that I tell people don't buy a second home. What I would tell people is make sure that you've really thought through all of the expenses of owning a second home before you buy it. You've got the maintenance costs, the insurance costs. Homes are expensive to own and maintain over time. And as long as you can afford it, it can be a fantastic asset for your family. Unfortunately, I think both of us all too often see people that haven't really thought through the total cost of ownership, of owning a piece of real estate, and have made mistakes along the way.
Yeah, and in my situation, Mark, I've told you this. I don't think I bought a second home so much as it was sold to me by a realtor friend of mine. We were actually looking for a rental. And he did the bait and switch and took me to this place. And he said, actually, this isn't for rent, it's for sale. But this was 2010. It was a bank-owned property that he said, make him a dumb offer. And I made him a really dumb offer, and they took it. So, I'm kind of an accidental second homeowner. But it has brought our family a lot of joy. We use it a lot. It's brought our friends a lot of joy, too. We hand out the keys pretty liberally. So, but we can't rent it in an Airbnb situation. So it is a big cash drag. If you're going to own a second home, you really, to your point, you've got to think about, can you generate some income off of it? And if you can't, how much are you really going to use it?
Yeah.
And if you can generate income off of it, do you really want to be a landlord? Because that's not always the greatest thing in the world. And those phone calls tend to come at inconvenient times, and that property might not cash flow as much as you thought. So, yeah, you do have to give very careful thought to the second home, and yes, there's an upside to it, but it's not always all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about the usage. Both of you guys use your places quite a bit,
Yes.
and wonderful family experiences there. I've got some friends with second homes that rarely gets used,
Right.
and I think that's kind of what you want to be careful.
Yeah,
That's
right.
where Airbnb is such a great fit for that. Hey, as we transition to then, I'll say, the post-retirement life, let's talk a little bit about integrating into retirement life as we kind of buffer up against that age 65. And Tim, I think you have some pretty strong feelings about way to prepare for retirement.
Yeah, we tend to encourage our clients not to abruptly retire, or at least consider easing into retirement, because I think when we all have difficult days at work, and we say, I can't wait till the day where I can just pull the plug and be finished with this. But that's a massive lifestyle change, just from a time standpoint, but also psychologically. I think a lot of us, our identities are very wrapped up in what our profession is. When someone says, tell me about yourself, you'll lead with your spouse, your kids, but also you talk about your profession. And I try and have my clients go through this thought experiment. A year into retirement, and you meet someone at a cocktail party and they ask you, what do you do? Are you going to be comfortable with the answer? And are you going to be comfortable with the identity that you end up with when you don't have an answer other than I'm retired and I play golf, and which is fine. But I think it's a much easier transition if you would consider working part-time, or doing some consulting, or at the very least volunteering and keeping yourself busy and engaged, especially in those early years, because that transition to a cold turkey stop working type of situation is quite dramatic. And the other thing that we warn people against, for those of us, the folks that are our clients, they're savers. They've built up a nice nest egg. That's why they need financial planning. But as a saver, you've spent your entire life with money going in the right direction, as we say. You've been putting away money into those 401ks and into your other savings vehicles and investment vehicles. When you retire, that flow turns around and comes the other direction. And that is for most people, very, very difficult to get used to. You've prided yourself on being a saver all these years. You've never really worried about running out of money until you retire, and that flow of money starts to go the other direction. It looks great on paper, and it looks great in the software that we run, and the plan is rock solid, and you're not going to run out of money. But it's easy to tell someone that, but the emotional side of our psyche jumps in pretty quickly when that money starts to go the other way, and you really need to be prepared for that and be 100% sure that you've got the right plan in place.
Yeah.
What would you add to that as people prepare going to retirement?
Yeah, that I would just wholeheartedly agree that change from the accumulation to the decumulation phase of your life, it's an incredibly emotional change for people that most of them are not ready for it. They're just not prepared for it. I think this is a part for us as well where tax planning really starts to become paramount. Most people at this phase of their life probably have some tax-free money in Roths, some tax-deferred money in 401ks and IRAs, as well as some taxable assets in a brokerage account. And really thinking through how they're going to use those different buckets of money in the most tax-efficient way to create cash flow for them to live off of becomes really important, because you can make a lot of mistakes. You've saved, you've accumulated, hopefully you've invested well. Now how you de-invest and create cash flow from those different pockets at different points in your retirement years, before Social Security, before required minimum distributions, and you really think that through and plan it out, you can minimize a lot of tax friction if that's done really intelligently.
It can get very complex. You need some serious strategies depending on the situation.
Yep.
You know, we don't have time to really get into all the different ways you can do that. I just encourage anybody out there, get with somebody like yourself, an advisor, a financial planner, because it's super important to have the right approach as you get into that stage. So let's get into the next stage. You've saved, you've retired, you're comfortable with the negative, the outflows. Now what's on our mind? Because now we get into perhaps maybe gifting, a little more philanthropy, things like that. Tim, what do the post-65 need to be doing right?
Yeah, we should be thinking about legacy at that point. And philanthropy, whether it be through volunteering your time, whether it be through contributing money, and that can be during your lifetime, or it can be in a bequest to a charity after you're gone. And we're also starting to think about, at that point, gifting to the kids and the grandkids. And those conversations that we're having with our retired clients in that stage of life is, they all say the same thing, which is, well, I don't want to ruin my kids' incentives to save on their own, right? And so there's this balance of, I want to help them out, but I don't want to destroy their incentive. And I want my kids to save for their kids' college. I want them to have to be disciplined the way I was, right? And so there's this balance here between ruining your kids and your grandkids' incentives, but also helping them out in the stage of life that they need it. And sometimes my clients aren't thinking about that aspect of it. Well, you know, if you have a client that's in their 70s, and well, my kids can have what's left when I'm gone. Well, okay, but if you pass away in your 80s when they're in their upper 50s, they don't need the money as much then. Give them the money when they need it, when they're buying a home, or they're trying to save for their kids' college, and they're trying to pay off a mortgage or pay off student loan debt. These are the years when they really need the money. So you kind of have to balance those two considerations out. When is the money needed the most versus what's that going to do to incentives?
When do you start telling the kids how much money you have?
Oh boy,
It
we
depends.
don't. They do, right? We don't tell the kids. The parents tell the kids, and
So-
I say that to make the point of
And that was
that's
my question.
That's a
is
family by
when
family decision.
When do the parents?
Yeah.
When do the parents
I
tell
mean-
them how much we have and how much they're going to get?
And that's a very family by family decision for sure.
And what is the kid's reaction? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
How are the kids going to react to that? Some kids will see that and okay, well, I'm done working, right? And so we don't want that to happen. Other families, the children are taking pride in doing things on their own. So yes, it's absolutely a family by family decision to be made. But at some point along the way, the kimono has to come off, right? I mean, as the parents get into that stage that we were talking about before, where the kids are having to make decisions for them, and if their health and mental acuity of the parents is declining, you need to bring the kids into. You can't just give them a partial view at that point. That's the point, I think, at which you really need to show them everything.
So if you extend what Tim said earlier, the phases that the parent goes through, right? They've got kids that are in their 20s, maybe their 30s, and our experience, I think, is very similar to yours, where the parents are really concerned about those kids developing good habits and discipline around saving and investing. And I think our experience has been, once they feel comfortable that those kids have good habits, so now we're talking about maybe roughly age 40, late 30s to 40. At that point, they see that the kids are executing. You know what I mean? They're disciplined, they're saving, they're investing, they're making good decisions. That's when we see mom and dad start to get much more comfortable sharing the details of the family situation. Before that, they tend to be a little gun shy, right? Because the kids just haven't proven yet that they can make really good decisions with that information.
One of the things, too, I think in that age group, and again, this is more from experiences, is you think through let's just say they're together, older couples. When do you bring the family together and talk about some of these things? Like, here's the wealth, here's how it might be distributed, the family or the medical directives. It's almost like a role playing of, this is the situation you're going to have to make a call on, do we pull the plug or not? Like, you don't know how you react until you're in the moment. Or I just think those things are so critically important that people aren't prepared for. Or is there?
Yeah.
It feels like you got to have that stuff in place. Not in place, but openly discussed.
You do. There's no playbook for that, and this is why we see it go wrong, I think, so often, that there isn't a great playbook for that, other than to say you do need to have this conversation. And tragically, sometimes the conversation isn't had until it's too late, right? And too late, meaning one of the parents is ill or is declining in mental acuity, and then you're rushing to do this under duress. So, the best I think we can do is repeatedly encourage people to have this conversation before it becomes a crisis situation.
Yeah. Mark, we keep talking about emotions in different ways, right? So emotions around multi-generational planning, emotions around, just retiring and moving from accumulation to decumulation. Another emotional state that we see all the time when somebody retires is they turn on CNBC every day.
Yeah, right.
I mean, people that have never watched CNBC, they've been working their entire life, and now every day they wake up and CNBC gets turned on. Another really emotional change for them, right? A lot of them have a lot of free time, and so they start watching the business news, right? So another big emotional shift for them in retirement is just having the time to now start to take some interest in their investments, where they've been maybe outsourcing that to us for even decades, and now all of a sudden they're listening to business news all the time and wanting to take actions in their portfolio. So I would say tuning out the noise. You guys did a great movie on this that I think is available on YouTube, right?
Yep.
But that title of Tune Out the Noise, boy, that's a big one for us. When somebody retires, getting them to be willing to tune out the noise and just focus on living a great retirement and living life, it's one of the biggest challenges we face.
Yeah, and I think that dovetails well to what we were talking about before with you don't want to completely disengage when you're retired. And if you've got all this free time on your hands, you're going to be watching financial news and political news on both sides of the spectrum. And that will put you under emotional duress in a lot of ways. So stay involved and volunteer, get involved with your favorite charities, get involved with your grandkids, but staying home and watching 24-hour news is not a good pastime in retirement.
I heard it well said. Stay informed, read or listen to what it is. And once you're informed, shut it off.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're done. Hey, two things I want to get into here and get your thoughts on quickly, just kind of going back to some things I think that are pretty important probably for the audience, and go back to risk mitigation. We haven't talked about umbrella insurance yet. We talked a little bit about life insurance and that, but even umbrella insurance, as you think about, particularly, okay, your kids are driving now, or maybe you happen to have a pool at your house. There's accidents that can and do happen. You got to be protected there. How do you talk to your clients about umbrella?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a discussion on the insurance side of just making sure that they've got adequate coverage. You're right. Different families have different situations, swimming pools. I'm in Idaho. A lot of families are hunters and outdoorsmen and whatnot, right? So you've got different families have different risk, and that should certainly be covered through umbrella insurance and making sure that they've got an adequate amount of that. Just depending on the asset base of the family, that's going to really kind of drive how much they've got to have.
Well, even examples, this happened to one of our neighbors in a previous place we lived, where they had a dog, and the dog bit the kid next door, got sued, and the insurance company, fortunately, they had umbrella insurance, but settled for like a couple $100,000. Didn't even drop blood, so it was a pretty minor bite. So these things, you just need protection that you don't even know what you need it for.
Well, and it's not, right? I would add to that, it's not just about insurance, but how are your assets titled from a lawsuit standpoint, from a liability standpoint? Getting this is, from personal experience, something we weren't really thinking about, that our attorney, our estate attorney, encouraged us to do. When you've got teenage drivers, in whose name is the car in, right? Even when you have adult drivers, you're not owning your cars as joint owners. And when that teenager becomes an adult, you want that car in his or her name as soon as possible, right? And so these are little details that we don't often think about with respect to how am I titling my assets that can have huge implications from a liability standpoint.
Yeah. All right. The other thing I wanted to ask you guys, this go back to maybe it's the post-retirement, thinking about some of the gifting and things like that. Donor advice funds can be pretty effective. Let's just summarize what a donor advice fund is and how you guys talk to your clients about that.
So donor advice fund is it's an easier, more simple way to, I like to think of it as a simpler way to have a lasting family foundation type of a vehicle from which you can make contributions. So with a donor advised fund, I can make contributions to the fund today. I get the tax deduction at the time that I make the contributions to the fund, but I don't have to distribute it out to charities until some date in the future. So it's a place where you can put your charitable contributions in there and give them out in large amounts, small amounts at a future date. And you can keep it there in perpetuity. For us, we've used ours in our family as a way to kind of get my kids on board with what our charitable mission is. And we make regular contributions to it. But at Christmas time every year, we get the family together and we talk about, okay, this is what we're going to be giving away this year. And we ask the kids for input as to, give me 2 or 3 charities that you think are a good idea as a recipient of some of what we're going to give away, and why is that? And so by allowing you to manage, you're separating the tax deduction from the actual gift to the charities through the donor advised fund. It gives you a lot of flexibility in that respect, allows you to optimize it from a tax standpoint, and it gives you this something to kind of rally the family around as far as deciding what it is you stand for from a charitable standpoint.
Yeah. Anything you'd expand on with that?
I'd bring it back to my point earlier on tax planning. This post-retirement time frame for people that have been fortunate enough to accumulate assets in different buckets, a donor advised fund becomes a really important tool in really optimizing people's retirement tax situation. It can be a wonderful tool when combined with like an IRA to Roth IRA conversion, right? You can offset that income with a contribution to a donor advised fund. And it's a tool in the toolbox of really creating a pretty tax efficient lifestyle after retirement. But tax planning and retirement can get really tricky, and it can be really important. And a donor advised fund can be a great tool in helping somebody both help them achieve all of their philanthropic desires while making some really smart tax efficient decisions.
Thanks for going through those couple topics with me. I just wanted to make sure we touched on those. So let's just wrap it up here and bring it all together. We kind of went through, I'll call it the financial journey and the different stages through that. As you think through, say at the high level, any overall summarized comments you want to make here on that? And Tim, I'll start with you, and then I might throw a few in, and then Mike will go to you.
Okay. I think of all the things we've talked about in both of these episodes, the one thing that is crystal clear is start when you're young. The power of compounding, as we've said, is magic. And if you can, if you can start when you're young, even with small amounts of contributions to a 401k or a Roth 401k, the implications for you and for your family off into the future are tremendous. And the other thing too is, as far as the other stage of life, when you're at the end stages of life and starting to think about what to do with these assets that you've accumulated, spending money on others is going to bring you more happiness than spending it on yourself. Mm-hmm. And when you get to those later stages of life, and we did touch on this, it's better to do things than to have things, but I see this from my clients all the time. They've never been so happy about their money as when they gave it away. Whether it's to their kids when they can make a meaningful impact on the lifestyle of their children, or to a nonprofit that's important to them, that's the most impact that their money has. So when you get to that other end, you should really be thinking not what my money can do for me, but what it can do for other people. And there's been a lot of studies on that. The data is really clear. That's what's going to bring you the most happiness with your money.
Tim sort of took the kind of the planning emotional side of this. I'll take the more of the investment portfolio management side of this, right? Which is he definitely talked about starting early, compounding, right? I would say when we think about what people can do to put the odds in their favor from an investment standpoint, so you're saving that money now, right? Get it really broadly diversified in a really low cost way. Right. And if you can do that from a really young age, you talked about not gamifying it. Right. But if you can just have a really disciplined approach, you can tune out the noise, and you can take appropriate amounts of risk in a really low cost, broadly diversified way. And you can let that compound for decades upon decades. You're going to be in really good shape someday.
Yep. My, I think key takeaways as we wrap up here, a couple things. I think one is, go back to the family dynamics and make sure everyone's very well aware of what those things are as you have the aging parents around that in terms of their wishes, directives, emotionally, all that. I think the other one is we've gone through different stages here. And for me, everyone's important. I don't feel like there's one more important than another, because the one down the road is a function of what happened early on. So each one of these different stages are super important. I think for many families, you can't afford to screw it up. And a lot of things we got into here can get very technical and strategic. So I just encourage everybody out there just to get with a financial advisor, a financial planner, to make sure you got the right plan in place for you and you're optimizing the decisions as best you can. Yeah. So with that, gentlemen, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you guys taking some time away from the conference and joining us here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Listen, your clients are lucky to have you. You guys do phenomenal work, and I'm sure you're very rewarded emotionally by the impact you have on families.
We are.
So congratulations to the work you've done there.
Thank you.
With that, thank you all for joining us here. Today was part 2 of the session around making the best decisions with your money over time. Be sure to go check out part 1 if you haven't done that yet. Thanks again for joining, and have a wonderful rest of the day.